Hi, my name is Betty. I'm a grateful believer of Jesus who struggles with trust issues, fear of abandonment, and suicidal tendencies, and I have been delivered from a past of physical abuse and sexual sin.
Hi, Betty. My name is Tony, and I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ. Anger, failed relationships, and their consequences brought me to CR, and today I struggle with PTSD. Betty and I couldn't have been farther away from one another, she in Ohio, me in Colorado, but we had some similarities in that we both grew up in broken homes. My father left our household when I was very young, right after the death of my younger sister at the tender age of 4.
And my brother died when I was only 9, followed by 3 years later by the death of my mother to suicide. She had been very ill with emphysema, and she felt that her illness was adversely affecting the lives of her family. And I learned from this that a mother who loves you will give everything, even her own life, for her kids. After that, I lived a life of just trying not to be the odd one. I just wanted to not be the orphan, the different one. I wanted to fit in. I wanted to belong to someone, to anyone. I met the Lord at 14, and I felt that I fit again. But when a pastor told me that though I believed I was called into ministry, that women can never be pastors, I walked away from the church and from God.
Meanwhile, back in Colorado, I was getting through my school years as well. My mother remarried, and though I had a good relationship with my stepfather, he could be very abusive when he drank. When I was younger, he had come into my room and yelled at me for singing Jesus Loves Me out loud. And as the years went on, the arguments between him and my mother got larger and larger. One night, I came downstairs after hearing their voices raised to find that my stepfather had thrown a beer at my mother. There she stood with beer streaming down her head and her face. She had just been to the beauty shop that day. This made her so mad. She picked up a small can of Crisco and threw it back at him. He had a gash on his forehead. I didn't care. I was going to protect my mom, so I jumped on him. I was about to lower the boom when my mother begged me to stop. He went to jail that night, but my mother filed for divorce, though she didn't press charges. My mother later married another man who also drank. I really didn't think this was a good idea, and in the end, it wasn't. Now, my favorite verse was Luke 6:31, do to others as you would have them do to you. But my Tony Campbell translation said, if I treat others right, they should treat me right, right? And if they treat me bad, I will treat them bad back, right? No. So paying evil for evil or getting even was my mantra. And I did say was, and is something that my sin nature had automatically went to. In relationships, I kept records of wrongs and then used those wrongs to justify my poor actions. I was playing the blame game, told you it was coming up, and losing. In the meantime, I thought I had met my soulmate. I wanted to marry her, but when I chose to go in the Navy, she was not on board with my decision. So we broke up, and I began my own legacy of broken relationships to add to that of my parents. I wanted to stay, I wanted to be with her, but the lure of adventure burned within me, so off to the Navy I went.
While Tony was sailing the 7 seas, I was creating quite the mess of my life. You'll remember that my pastor told me I could not serve in ministry, right? Well, that night I was very angry, and I was 17, and like any 17-year-old, I thought I knew everything. If God didn't need me, I didn't need him. So I grabbed a friend, we bought some beer and some weed, and had quite the little party, gossiping back and forth about how mean our pastor was and how he didn't know anything. We decided to show up at our youth group, which that night was at my youth pastor's house. We didn't last long when I was thrown out for being intoxicated. On the way out, I really put the pedal to the metal. I heard a loud bang, but my friend was waving his arm to go, go, go. So I just went faster. When we got to his house, he said, do you know what you did? And I had no idea, but I had committed quite a few crimes that night. Driving while intoxicated at 17 years old, and hit and run on a police car. My great decision-making continued when I decided to marry a guy that I met on the Air Force Base after going on a blind date with another guy who got too drunk to drive me home. My knight in shining armor turned out to have his own issues that he had not worked through, spawned by an abusive and disconnected father. he knew that I knew that he was abusive even before I married him, but I thought it was just me, being young and unable to do the things that a wife should do. I thought I'd get better at being a wife and then he wouldn't be so angry. He was always mentioning his previous girlfriend who had been to Miss Nude Florida and how she took great care of him. Well, one day I saw an ad for waitresses at a strip club and I thought this was the answer to my situation. I could work weekends there and still be an administrative assistant at the state of Ohio. When I went to the club, the manager suggested that I at least try dancing, and that led me to a life that provided money to him, but nothing but degradation, loss, and a lot of lies to me. The abuse didn't abate, by the way, and after our first child was born, his violence turned from me to her. And one day he beat her so badly, the doctors were concerned her kidneys were permanently damaged. This was the beginning of the end of our relationship. It was when I stood up, put on my big girl's panties, and began seeking jobs in apartment seeking. A good friend helped me move, and he helped me find a car. It was amazing to be stepping out on my own. That friend, Lane, later became my husband, having fallen in love with me and my kids, and we began to make a life together.
Wow, that's a lot of living, isn't it? But while Betty was doing all of that, I was seeing the world. I enjoyed my time in this service, but I did drink to excess at times and got into trouble a few times with that. I lived a life of wild parties and promiscuity, which I am not proud of. I attempted sub school, but my ears could not bear the pressure in the compression chambers. So I returned to San Diego and was first stationed on the USS Duluth LPD-6, which was a Marine cargo ship. Basically, I was their Uber driver. I made 2 Western Pacific cruises on this ship. I was a machinist mate working in the engine room. After 4 years, I was honorably discharged, but I returned home to Colorado with no degree and into a very depressed economy. I struggled for 2 years, then re-enlisted. This time I was stationed on the USS White Plains AFS-4. This was a food store ship and it was stationed out of Guam, USA. This ship came with some perks. Some of the ice cream on the ship came up missing because we quarantined it to make sure that it was safe for consumption. Looking out for the fleet. This ability to keep the soft serve ice cream makers going earned me the nickname Mr. Taylor Freeze. I had many good friends on this ship. I served in fire suppression team as well. I then went to serve on the USS Missouri, BB-63, the battleship known as the Mighty Mo, on which the Japanese had surrendered in World War II took place. By the way, I was not there during World War II. I'm old, but I'm not that old. Anyway, I ended up getting out after my second enlistment. I was considering this as I was about to be married, and I saw that the Navy life was often not good for marriages. I witnessed affair after affair. I didn't want to end up divorced like my parents. The decision was cemented when my executive officer called me to his office. I was told to go immediately, so I didn't change, and I had been at work in the engine room. He was furious with me coming to see him dirty. When he asked me if I was going to re-enlist, my old friend Anger did the talking for me. And though I ended my enlistment honorably, I might have decided differently if a cooler head had prevailed.
My decision to leave my first husband, who had become my trafficker, taking all the monies I made in the sex industry and encouraging me to sink further and further into that world so he could benefit, was a natural continuation of my life. If they're hurting you, push them away. Because if you get close to them, they will leave you or they will die. After finding an apartment, Lane and I had begun to date, so we moved in together. In 1989, we were married. In addition to my 2 daughters, we had 3 sons. I was a fashion editor of 2 nationally distributed magazines, contributing editor to a few as well. Lane was the vice president of a company, and we loved our titles. We loved our station in life. We had struggled when we were young, but we worked very hard, and that had paid off. I took model searches to fashion cities like New York, where I arrived by limo, dined at windows on the World Restaurant, in the World Trade Center, and I worked alongside some of the biggest names in fashion. Then 9/11 happened. Lane called one morning and asked me to turn on the TV to see if reports he was getting from work were true. I watched the buildings I had been inside only weeks before, huge, seemingly impenetrable buildings, collapsed to ash on the ground. Shortly thereafter, the titles, the prestige, no longer mattered. I began to search for true meaning in life. And as was the norm in my life, I began to push Lane away before he could leave me. These events led Lane to a men's Christians conference and a relationship to God, and I also returned to my Savior. We started homeschooling. And I released most of my clients so that I could get a ministry degree, and I led the local homeschool co-op of 2,500. Lane was doing great at work, and he was taking busloads of men to Christian conferences every year. Then Lane began to have problems swallowing. He was diagnosed with esophageal cancer. He battled it hard, but in the end, on December 20th, 2010, Lane slipped from my arms into the arms of Jesus. Our 5 children and I wept bitter tears, and we were all in shock. I questioned, how could a God who loved me take a father from his children? Lane had been a good and a faithful servant. Why was he not rewarded with a long and healthy life? I became confused, and someone came into my life who said he'd help us out. I made a rash decision, feeling perhaps this was how God had intended. For my children and I to be cared for. I overlooked the trauma I had just endured, and I acted out of desperation instead of inspiration. But he ended up helping himself to all of my money. He moved us to Oregon, and I bought a house, and he began to drain our savings without my knowledge. He then went to court to fight me for the home that I had purchased. I later found out I was one in a long line of women he had done the same thing to. I was devastated. My husband, the love of my life, was gone. Our business had failed due to the economy. My savings was gone. And my children now had no way to attend college. My faith was shaken. I felt totally alone with no hand to hold. The only solution I could see to this puzzle was to provide my kids with my life insurance worth more than $1 million and take my own life. Isn't that what a good mother does? Provides everything, even her own life, to care for her children. In the hospital, I learned that my value to my kids was so much more than monetary. I did a lot of praying and crying out to God. He put his hands under me, and he put me back together.
Amen. Meanwhile, I had married right after I left the Navy, and I'd done everything I could to ensure that my kids, we had 4, would not inherit my parents' divorce legacy. We attended church. I was involved in scouts and activities with our kids. Our life looked great from the outside, but inside, my marriage was rotting. My wife began to have affairs. My world was rocked. I had anger so deep, I thought my head was going to explode. I called my dad to let him know I was going to get a divorce. He asked me as to why. When I told him, he informed me that's why I left your mom. This blew my mind because my mom had passed away years ago and I couldn't ask her. And I had held such resentment toward my father for leaving us. That anger caused me to build walls for years. I had passed up opportunities to spend time with my father and my half-siblings because my anger got in the way. For instance, I called him from basic training. We had no money, so I called collect. My father told me that he could not pay my bills and not to call collect again. So I didn't. I didn't call again for years, but now I was confused. I had tried for 6 years to work on the marriage, but she would not stop the infidelity. I was angry, humiliated, and ashamed. I was now facing the job of raising 4 kids on my own, as she didn't want custody. I tried getting help through a Christian divorce care program, but even with that, I wanted to get even with my ex for harm she was doing. Romans 12:17 helped me. You remember from the beginning of my testimony, never pay back evil for evil to anyone. Respect what is right in the sight of all men. But the thought still came. And my friend George had a great idea to try Celebrate Recovery. And I shook my head and said, "What? What do I need CR for? I'm not an addict." He replied, "Well, you got some hurts, right?" "Well, yeah." "And you got some hang-ups?" And I said, "Yeah." "And they are starting to lead to bad habits, right?" And I said, "Well, you got me there." So here I am, 14 years later. Woohoo. I found that CR was a lot like the military. It had accountability and it had a forever family. During inventory, I was able to forgive my parents, my first girlfriend, my ex-wife, and the most important one, myself. After this time, I was offered a position with my company to go to Oregon on assignment.
I just wanted some Jamba Juice. I'm not a coffee drinker. I like smoothies, so there I was in line with Tony, and we began talking about life. Interesting guy, also a parent, a believer, how nice. That led to a date, which led to him asking me if I'd like to go somewhere special with him. Now, so you know, Tony did ask me to 2 odd places during our courtship. One was a funeral, not really the place to invite a widow. Not my idea of a fun time. The other was Celebrate Recovery.
It worked.
Oh my, I sat through that meeting. I was seething inside. I thought, what have I done? I am dating someone who's going to drink the rest of my savings away. But he told me that he attended the program for anger due to his divorce. Now, that made sense, but I'd never heard of a program for hurts. Shortly after that date, though, we took his kids on a bike ride on a trail that is closed to traffic. Because of this, when we were short on helmets, I took mine off and I gave it to his daughter. The kids were getting pretty tired on the ride, and I knew there was a Dairy Queen nearby if we just left the closed trail. I told them that I would ride lead and not to go across the highway until I got across and waved them over. I began getting into the left turn lane and backpedaled as there were 2 cars coming toward me. Then I went to make the turn, and that is literally all I remember.
So a woman driving an Isuzu pickup truck drove her vehicle and Betty's bike into the railing outside the restaurant. She flew up and landed in the roadway. I ran to Betty and protected her from the oncoming traffic and prayed, "God, I just found her. Don't take her from me." She would ask over and over again what happened, and I would kindly tell her, and she would ask again. Someone took my kids into the Dairy Queen for a drink. You notice there's an ice cream theme with me? Never mind. Anyway.
I was taken by ambulance to a trauma center where the doctor told me I might not walk again. They needed to do surgery as my left pelvis was pulverized, my right broken, my sacrum was broken, my shoulder had a possible break, and my head had been split open. Tony asked me to marry him the night prior to my surgery, and having been the caregiver of a patient, that character broke through my mistrust of men, and I agreed. After my rehabilitation, Tony was asked by our church to lead a Celebrate Recovery ministry. I began attending in order to help him.
I needed it.
I enrolled in the STEP study only to fulfill the requirements of the ministry so I could lead a women's small group. I was sure I had no issues to be dealt with. I explained sweetly to Tony as I worked through the book that this question and that question didn't pertain to me because, well, I wasn't an addict.
And the good husband I was told her, "Keep at it. There is something in there for you."
Wow, did that frustrate me. But but within weeks, I realized at about step 4, I had anger issues due to Tony's custody battle and my many losses. I needed God's grace for those. I had also never told anyone in the church about my past in the sex industry. But then I was called into a ministry for strippers, prostitutes, and trafficked women. And through the steps, God began to tell me it was time to become transparent about my past life so that others could see his power and grace. Principle 6 helped me to gain trust for people other than my kids and my husband. I began to actually rely on my sponsor and show weakness enough to ask for help when I couldn't discern the right thing in a situation. I learned to quit enjoying my anger and living in it like it was something to be proud of. My sexually stained past, which I denied and hid for decades through my step work, became a ministry called Expose Hope. We now reach 700 dancers in 3 states every month with the love of Christ, and we opened a house for trafficked women in Oregon called Kim's Place. I was recently ordained. I was recently ordained 40 years after my original call. Tony, by the way, is one of our drivers and our board members, but that's another story that we just don't have time for here.
Yes, I am. Shortly after we married, my ex-wife, who made her way to my 4th step the first time for her actions during our marriage, filed for custody of our children. All this time, I had parented virtually alone, with her missing most of her visitation time. Again, I began to want to repay evil for evil. The step studies and open share groups allowed me to deal with this anger constructively. It helped me not to push that anger onto my current wife and to be a better man. Betty and I had went to couples and family counseling to help smooth our pathway. We also began to take different classes for healing and to serve our community. One of those was a class for veterans and their spouses. I went to that so I could help those who might be considering suicide, to not leave another veteran behind. As I was sitting there, listening to the others tell their stories, I remembered a period of time after I had transferred to the Missouri. Tragedy had struck my former ship, the USS White Plains. 6 sailors were killed and 5 injured during a shipboard fire caused by a fuel leak near the boiler. I knew and served with these men. This was my team. I would have been in the mix, except that I had transferred. I had noticed a problem with the fuel lines while I was serving there, and I wrote it up and reported it and left it at that. I often questioned if I should have done more, and I struggled with survivor's guilt. I was also very angry and held resentment that the Navy would not approve for me to go to the ceremonies for those shipmates. During this training, my sense of loss for my former shipmates hit me like a rock. I shared what I was feeling with the class. The instructor called me forward and gave me some really good advice. It was advice that I had already heard about and learned in CR, but I had not applied it to this issue. It was simply to forgive myself. Instead of living in the situation, I needed to live in the honor of their memory and be thankful to be alive. So as typical in recovery, I went to learn and help others and ended up helping myself. When I first heard CR was going to offer a Welcome Home open share group for veterans, I was ecstatic. Over the years, I had buried a lot of what I had been through, as most of us vets do. I found it difficult to share my military experiences, even within the CR small groups. Not sharing, as we all know, is very unhealthy. Now there would be a place with folks with similar backgrounds to share and relate to each other. If you are a veteran, I would love to chat with you about Welcome Home. Welcome Home can happen at the night of your CR, or it can happen as an open share only group on another night, or Saturday morning get together for breakfast or coffee, or even online. Now you remember, I didn't think I needed CR when George suggested it. That was my first sponsor too. He was also a Navy veteran. Well, I was honored and surprised when I received a call from our national director at Welcome Home asking me to be his replacement.
We do love CR. We love our forever family, but sometimes, to be honest, we both have had to work our steps about somebody with whom we serve in CR.
You see, CR is made up of people. People are just imperfect. We have both had instances where we were victims of slander, gossip, where people judged us incorrectly, and when we just wanted to walk away. Being in recovery, being in ministry is hard.
But the alternative is to stay where we are, to stay in our denial, to make excuses for our lives, and to lose the future that God has planned for us.
CR is for everybody. Today you may be walking through the door like I did.
And like I did, feeling alone and feeling like you don't fit. In a few years, God could take you to a summit, to leading a CR ministry, or
to becoming a member of the national team. So as difficult as it may be to volunteer, to make a meal, or attend that first leadership training, do it as soon as you can, and And leaders, be the example by attending every time an opportunity arises, because, well, it isn't about us, it's about the newcomer. You will find your greatest blessings and growth in sponsoring someone with your addiction or serving in a ministry that serves your hurt, be that an abused women's shelter or a suicide hotline or
An outreach to strippers, prostitutes, and trafficked women. Your hurt doesn't have to be obvious to everybody. You belong here with or without a criminal record, a substance abuse issue, or a hang-up everybody recognizes. Later down the road, there will be someone who needs to hear your story. We stand before you, a couple who has been broken.
I have been broken by divorce, anger, loss, PTSD, and the loss of friends aboard a ship.
I have been broken by the deaths of those I love, by sexual sin, and I was broken physically by a truck.
We have both been broken and wronged by the church, but we know that God can use Celebrate Recovery and the accountability and family you find here to help you heal and then to help others behind you do the same. Do keep coming back. We are going to end with Betty's favorite verse. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget none of his benefits, who pardons all your iniquities and heals all your diseases, who redeems your life from the pit. Psalms 103, 2 and 4.
Selah, amen.
Thank you.